My name is Russell Staples. I grew up in South Africa and served in the church for about 20 years in Africa, and then came to Andrews and taught here, and we've been here for a while. I'm recalling, and I've been through the materials I've collected over the years of the beginnings of Adventism in South Africa, going back to the very early days. A great change in South Africa took place in 1867. Diamonds had been discovered at Kimberley, which is up in the center of the country, about 600 miles from Cape Town, 500 miles from Port Elizabeth, where the 1820 settlers were. And this changed almost everything. That very same year, in 1867, the Prime Minister of South Africa at the Parliament in Cape Town put a little table down, and on the table he placed, I think, one of the largest diamonds they had found. And in his statement he said, "This is the rock on which South Africa will be built." And he was true. And many came from all over the world to come and mine diamonds there. Now, from an Adventist point of view, this is where William Hunt enters the picture. William Hunt was a miner in Nevada, and obviously a very bright, literate man, reading, and he began to read about Loughborough's meetings in I think up at Healdsburg, up in Northern California. And he got some of the literature, and eventually he went there, spent 5 days speaking to Loughborough, and gathered together almost all the literature he could find. He was obviously a very enterprising man, because then he went to mine in New Zealand. And while he was in New Zealand, diamonds were discovered at Kimberley in South Africa, and he came to Kimberley while he was there. And mining is not easy at Kimberley, as I understand that the diamonds are a result of volcanic upthrust through the soil, and so they were deep, as it were, sort of vertical tunnels filled with this volcanic material, and the diamonds within this volcanic material. While he was there, he quite staggered people. When they were mining and digging vigorously here on Sabbath, he was just sitting, reading his Bible and the literature he had, and watching them all dig. And they thought, what kind of man is this? And he did the same thing on Sunday as he was there. And this amazed people while they were there. And during all of this, he particularly impressed a man by the name of Van Druten. He was a businessman in Beaconsfield. And he was asking him, why are you came here to mine, you want diamonds, why are you so lazy, what's the matter with you? And in all this discussion, he eventually persuaded Van Druten and shared the literature with him, and Van Druten he was convinced about Sabbath and that meaning. There was another man there, very famous, a name very famous in Adventist history, Peter Wessels, Dutch Reformed. Van Druten also Dutch Reformed. And the Wessel family was a large family. He'd grown up, his father was living down at Wellington, which is a beautiful fruit-growing fruit-growing area in the Western Cape. And to show what a serious Christian his father was, he, having read the Bible, the Old Testament and everything, he felt that his baptism sprinkling as a boy was not efficient. He needed to be baptized as an adult by immersion. He spoke to quite a famous Dutch Reformed minister, and the minister didn't argue with him. He said, yes, I agree with you, but no, I can't do it. But eventually he was baptized. Now, his son Peter Wessels up there was very religious, and he became ill and was accused of having tuberculosis, consumption, and he feared that his last days were coming. And seeing this was the case, he devoted his days to studying the Bible, reading, connecting himself with Christ, that he would be prepared. And as he studied all by himself, he came to believe that Sabbath was the right day to keep, the commandments, the Beatitudes, all of that. And so he became a Sabbath-keeping Dutch Reformed. This upset his father a great deal. He was angry and said, it's one thing to be a Christian, but you are now becoming a Jew. And he was unhappy. And he went down and spent time with his father and convinced his father about the Sabbath. And then he came back. Now, this is where the 1820s begin to enter the picture. Some of the 1820s were established as a farming community, but by now, with thousands of people, well, maybe that's too much, hundreds of people in Kimberley, and the transportation needed between Port Elizabeth, the nearest 500 miles between, several of them became the transport riders. And I've heard them say that that was a relatively good life. They had large ox wagons, teams of about 16 oxen. They were working with the Africans, many of whom had become Christians. They would lead and take care of the oxen. They would take horses along with them. And when they were traveling up there, they would ride the horses, do a little hunting, fishing about the river. And so they said, in one way, this transport riding is the good life. And two men, Wilfred Fletcher Tarr and Albert Davies, were on this way, and they came up, and they were near Kimberley, and here at Peter Wessels' farm there was a dam, and they thought, oh, this would be a wonderful place to us spend the night, give the oxen water to drink and rest a little bit and eat something here on the field. And so they went to Wessels and said, may we unpack and spend the night here and we'll be gone again tomorrow? No, he said, you won't. And there they met Sabbath-keeping Peter Wessels. And they spent hours with him. Now, Fletcher Tarr was really not ordained, but he was a lay Wesleyan preacher. And they spent hours and hours. But eventually, Wessels persuaded Tarr. And this went on. About this time now, there were more people began to be keeping Sabbath there. And Van Dritten, the businessman, and the group, in 1886, he wrote a letter to our believers in Battle Creek, and he sent a check of £50. And he said, here we have a group of 8 or 10 families that are Sabbath keepers, and we want you to send some Dutch ministers here so that they can teach us. We need to learn more about all of this and so on. Van Druten had been reading, of course, Hunt's Adventist literature, and that's where he got the address and everything else. And so they were there. In May of 1887, in response to this, you can imagine the excitement in Battle Creek when the letter was received, and they put together a group, that came there. Among them was C.L. Boyd and D.A. Robinson, Burley and Anthony, a group of 7 actually. They came. Peter Wessels went down to be with his farmer at Wellington, his father at Wellington, and went down to meet the ship. And when they came, Boyd came back with him to Kimberley and held meetings, and shortly there were 8 or 10 that were baptized, and shortly after they built the first Adventist church in South Africa at Beaconsfield. I'd been in that church several times and sat there and thought about these events and so on, where it is there, the first one.